My guest on this edition of TDL Profiles is Anna Jane Grossman, the author of Obsolete, an encyclopedia of once common things passing us by. Anna Jane, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so this is not your first book, and this is quite a departure from your first book, which was It's Not Me, It's You, a breakup guide. Now, how did you go from the world of breakups and makeups to obsolete technology?
Well, one thing really didn't have that much to do with the other. I'm a journalist, and I have mostly in my life written on assignment. Um, when I was doing the breakup book, prior to that, I had been writing an engagements column and a wedding column at several different New York papers. I've been doing that for a few years, and then I started a breakup announcement site with a friend, and that kind of just led to this tongue-in-cheek book we wrote about breakups. And Obsolete actually started out as a cover story uh, early 2008 in the Washington Post magazine. Um, and the story was about things in our lives that are sort of slipping through our fingers, things that are sort of becoming antiques, even though they seem like they're still parts of our everyday life.
And what's the attraction? I mean, obviously now you've expanded this out into a book. What's the attraction to the content for you? Are there things disappearing that you're concerned are disappearing? Do you think this is just part of the march of technology?
I think it is part of the march of technology. I think that we're experiencing change at a real accelerated rate. And I think that's largely because of all the technological changes we've witnessed in our lifetimes. You know, I'm 29 and I already feel like so many of the uh, technology-based objects that I've known as an adult. I was going to say grew up with, but not even that. I mean, I didn't really have cell phones as a kid. I think I got my first cell phone when I was maybe 20. But even that cell phone, which 9 years ago doesn't seem that long, seems like it might have been from the 1950s. It looks like a brick. I think that we're not necessarily built to deal with this much change, to deal with this many just all the objects that we're cycling through in our lives. So the book is largely about objects. There's a section on fax machines, boom boxes, Walkman, a lot of things that kind of were part of like my childhood from the 80s and 90s. But then there's also a component of how those things are affecting our interpersonal lives. Um, I have a section on privacy, how certain notions of privacy, you could argue, are becoming obsolete, or our feelings about getting lost in this world full of, GPS. How have our notions changed about getting lost, both in a physical sense, like ending up on the side of the road and having that like freak out moment that we all know, or we used to know, and actually losing people, like losing touch, which is something that has become sort of a weird idea, that you could not know what happened to someone who you haven't seen in 15 years.
Is there some irony in the fact that this is a book, and obviously printed books are one of those things we always hear are going to go obsolete. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's overblown a bit, but um, I mean, first of all, do you think that will happen? Do you think in 10 years we're not going to see printed books the way we do now?
No, I don't think books are ever going to become obsolete completely. I think there will be fewer books than there are now, and that they'll be used for different purposes, perhaps that our notions about them um, will shift. That we will see more books online. We will see more e-readers, or however, or whatever you want to call them. Everything in the book is written in past tense, which is kind of you know, just kind of like a joke. I was sort of trying to give the reader the idea as if they were reading a book, as if they were reading a book in the future about the time we live in today, like as if this sort of was like a little time capsule. The joke of calling a book like this obsolete is that everything in it still exists, um, But the point I try and make in the book is chainmail suits still exist, and there's still people out there who are making typewriters. Nothing I think ever fades away completely.
I wonder if 50 years ago were people lamenting, saying, remember when we used to get telegraphs?
I think they were. I think it's human nature to feel nostalgia to that extent, because it's also how we sense our own mortality and our own sense of aging. It's looking out the car window and seeing that the landscape has changed. So I think that is part of it. But I also think that we are experiencing more nostalgia now than other generations, probably did. One of the people I talk about in the book is Alvin Toffler, who wrote the book Future Shock, which I think was in the early 70s. And one thing he talks a lot about in Future Shock is how, for ages and ages, people led lives that were pretty much exactly like the lives of their parents. People worked the same land, people wore more or less the same clothes, ate the same food, and married the girl next door or whatever it was. That people didn't travel very much, whereas in our lifetime, we've seen so much change that I think the difference between my life as a woman in my 20s and my mother's life as a woman in her 20s, who was also in New York City. She also worked. I mean, like, lots of similarities there, but actually, like, I think our lives are so different just because of all the changes that have taken place. The comparison I try and draw in the book is that our lives are more different than our parents' lives than their parents' lives were from their parents. That we're the gaps are getting only larger and larger, and you can see that with kids, who now are hopping on computers at 2 years old. For better or worse, that affects how people develop. We are victims of our technology.
One of the videos on your site I enjoyed was the payphone tour, when you had folks use the payphone. And I guess one of the questions that came out of that for me was the payphone. People said, "Oh, this doesn't sound good," and that kind of thing. Do you think in that particular case that was a situation where the payphone always sounded that way and we just didn't know it, or is it because of the neglect, because no one uses it, that they're really crappy now?
That's a really good question. I was watching TV the other day on like a non-high definition TV. I think it was actually like a videotape that I was watching in a non-high definition TV, and I just felt like, where are my glasses? I can't see anything. Everything is so fuzzy. And I'm not someone who's like that. I'm not like all up on things being crisp and perfect and whatever.
And speaking of phones and gadgets and obsolescence and all this, what is your cell phone of choice?
My cell phone of choice, I actually have a super crappy phone. Sorry to the people at Samsung. This is it. It's the Propel. It's nice that it has that, so I guess it could be even more crappy. But I kind of opted for like a non-smartphone because I felt like I'm so connected all the time that it would be nice if I could have some distance from that. Although lately I feel like my thumbs are sore. I wonder if other people are experiencing this. I think like I've like overused my thumb muscles, and I've like started to like try and do thumb stretches. But I was actually reading, I mean, something like thumbs obviously is never going to become obsolete, although, we might start using them in different ways than we have in the past. But I was reading about perfume manufacturers who are making perfumes that you spray with your thumb. Because there's this whole idea of a generation growing up that's using their thumbs more than their other fingers. So
again,
I might at some point get a phone that's not so taxing on these guys. The whole idea of things becoming obsolete is that part of it, I think, is we want more and more. our idea of what we need, the idea of what makes us happy. That's just a bar that's continually rising. Once you have the iPhone and you can make videos and update your Twitter or your Facebook and have your calendar and your address book and everything else, like that becomes something that you need. It's hard to take a step back. I mean, for me, the iPhone, the real appeal is it's one thing that you have to carry around, right? Like you don't kind of like everything all in one. But the more that we have at our fingertips, like the more that we need at our fingertips, where it used to be that you'd be perfectly fine leaving the house with, I don't know, like your wallet, your keys, and maybe a notebook or address book. Now we have to, bring the entire world basically in our pockets.
Very true. Any teasers on what's next?
What's next? I'm working on a couple of things. One thing that I've sort of been exploring a little bit on the site, which is obsoletethebook.com, is notions of what people in the past thought the future would look like. Sort of, I guess you could say, obsolete visions of the future. So that's one thing that I'm sort of curious about right now.
So it's obsoletethebook.com, and also folks can add their own entries at obsolete.wiki.com.
Well, and, you can actually go on to obsoletethebook.com. There's you can just click submit, and I've been putting entries just on the website itself.
Very good. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
You can find out more about Anna Jane Grossman and her book Obsolete at obsoletethebook.com. For thedigital lifestyle.tv, I'm Ryan Ritchie.